Welcome, everyone. I'm Lee Merriweather, and with me is Todd Orson. Todd and I are partners at the law firm of Merriweather and Tharp, and you're listening to Merriweather and Tharp Radio on the new Talk 106.7. Here where you learn about divorce, family law, tips on how to save your marriage if it's in the middle of a crisis, and from time to time, even tips on how to take your marriage to the next level. If you want to read more about us, you can always check us out online at AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. Well, Todd, normally I would say I'm excited, but this is a very serious topic.
It's a somber topic. I'm excited that we are talking about it because it's a message that needs to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way we're going to get it out today with some help is a powerful way. And so hopefully, you know, if there's anyone listening or if anybody listening knows of anyone that needs this kind of help, hopefully this show will be helpful. And
Yes.
I've said help in many different forms, like 12 times in that sentence.
That was impressive.
I couldn't help myself. There you go. I like it.
Well,
I'm done.
You're done. So, in the past couple of years, we're going to have to bring some levity to this, but in the past couple of years, we have unfortunately dealt with our share of suicides and a lot of mental health issues. In some cases, it was our client. In other cases, it was the opposing party. But in every case, it was a tragedy. And a tragedy that we can hope to avoid in the future with education and help. Now, I think the biggest tragedy in our divorce cases are that people, they know they're hurting, but they're afraid to ask for help. Maybe it's a mom or a dad in a contested custody case who's afraid to reach out for help because it's going to be used against them in the divorce. Or maybe it's an executive who's afraid of how reaching out for help will impact his or her career if they seek counseling when they're struggling. But thankfully, with us today is to talk about this very sobering topic is Eric Lang. And before I introduce Eric, I just wanted to share that I first heard his story at a bar meeting, and he was sharing his challenge, his struggles with a mental health disorder. And I'll let him tell his story in a minute. And he went through a really rough time, but there is a happy ending that I think everyone needs to hear this. So Eric has been practicing law in Atlanta, Georgia since 1990. His practice has been a mix of litigation and general business counseling, and Mr. Lang's career has spanned 25 states in 4 countries with great breadth. I need great breath to talk about this. He has won 7-figure results for plaintiffs and summary judgments for defendants. He has successfully tried cases that were front page news, and he's even made law that's discussed in seminars and articles. Mr. Lang's peers consistently ask him to speak at continuing legal education seminars, and he has been honored by Super Lawyers magazine as a rising star in the legal profession. The
You're
legal
gonna get
profession.
it. Don't worry. Don't give up. Do
and
not
Super
give up.
Lawyers. That's what happens when I don't.
And it's
practice
breadth. There's
breadth.
a D there.
Okay.
You're not
Breath.
breadthing. Yeah.
Obviously, he isn't. That's why he
That's
can't
right.
I could go on and on about Eric.
Please don't.
Yes, because I would be. You will mercilessly
Oh, you got to
torture
stop.
me. I can't talk today.
And now let's bring Eric on, who can hopefully speak.
Hey, Eric, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So before I forget, if people want to read more about you and all your escapades and everything you've done, they can visit you at langlegal.com. Is
Yes.
that right? And also you have a blog that's georgialegalupdate.wordpress.com?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, Eric, I know that you've come on the show with a wealth of information, and we're going to get into all that because I'm really looking forward to hearing this part of the story again. We had a short version at the bar luncheon, so I'm looking forward to the longer version. But before we get started, I wanted you to share your story because I think your story is so compelling because so many people are afraid to go get help and because of the long-term impact it might have. But your story is one that to me, when I heard it, was very motivational when I heard it.
Well, I think thank you. I think the best way to approach an issue like a mental health issue is to not say, what was the day you woke up and realized you had a mental health issue, but how did you wake up and realize you had a mental health issue? What got you there, and what got you out of it? My particular issue is bipolar disorder, as I've learned, and it's got some ups where you think you're invulnerable, and it's got some downs where you can't move out of the quicksand one way or the other. These obviously are not clinical terms, but you get the idea. We believe, being humans, believe that everything that's going inside our head is correct. And if you get praise for what you do, if you get praise for how you do things, then you have no reason to suspect that something is wrong. If you walk around with a pebble in your shoe your entire life and you always think your right foot hurts because there's a pebble in there, and you think that everyone else has a pebble in their shoe, you have no reason to doubt it. It's the same thing in your brain. So if you go your whole life, long periods of time not doing anything, followed by short bursts of inspiration and success, for which you're given A's in elementary school and A's in middle school and honors in high school and college and so on and so forth, then no one has told you you're doing poorly or you're not doing things correctly, because the little piece of paper that you get at the end of things says you're thinking right. Your head is right. You have no reason to wonder. Then you get into a profession like law. And I'm a litigator. I'm a trial lawyer. So everything is either a win or a loss. And if you win, you did well. Doesn't really matter how you got to the win. If you spent the 28 days looking at the ceiling and the 36 sleepless hours writing the brief, and you beat the guy who spent 4 hours a day writing the brief, well, that person might have done it the right way, but you won, so you did it the right way. Never do you think that what you are doing might be wrong, because all you hear is positive feedback. No one questions the process because the outcomes are so positive. It's a young man's game. You can only so long get away with using your highs to counteract your lows. You start taking greater risk. You start doing less intelligent things. You start digging holes that are deeper. And all of a sudden, you start doing things that are just stupid. I woke up one day and decided that it made sense, for example, to access trust account funds to make payroll, because I knew a couple of weeks later I was going to win a verdict and pay back the trust funds. That's not allowed. Okay, but I convinced myself that because I was that, powerful, that I could do it. All of this came crashing down eventually one day when I decided, again, because this was a great idea, that if I got a whole bunch of pills and a glass of vodka and put the two of them together, I can die and there'd be insurance money and everyone would be happy. It is lucky that I am a much better lawyer than I am a pharmacist. Apparently, that's a. Let me interrupt you. Before you were talking about this subject as somber, and certainly it's not ha-ha funny, but the more, negative energy we attach to a subject, the greater the stigma is.
Good point.
And some people say I'm a little bit too flip, but I find that if I attach reality as opposed to negative energy to these subjects, people will find them more approachable. And so when I make a joke like better lawyer than pharmacist, that's not me being flip. That's me just talking about something as if it just happened. I'm not changing the way I talk just because this issue has some negativity attached to it. Back to the narrative. So the next morning I wake up in the hospital, and the special hospital, as I like to call it, and the therapist says to me, she's going down her checklist. Well, was this the first time you've ever, considered killing yourself? My response to her instantaneously was, well, other than the normal thoughts that everyone has about it every day, and the look on her face is what told me, okay, I'd never thought that was something that was wrong, because
You thought everybody had that pebble in their shoe.
Exactly. And I had no reason to question the way I was thinking because I was good at thinking. And that's sort of the end of the how far down can you go. Since then, and we'll explore this more, I took 2 years off from the practice of law, and if you were in the room, you'd see me putting air quotes around took 2 years off. The bar encouraged me to take those 2 years off, but that's actually a good thing. They stabilize the medication, you go into therapy, you get healthy, and I've worked myself back to where I'm now practicing law full-time on sophisticated litigation like I was 5 or 6 years ago. And so that's sort of, the beginning to the end of the story. In terms of speaking, you saw me because a judge had seen me speak, and I was speaking to that judge because another judge had seen me speak. This is probably approaching 20, 25 times that I've given this talk. I feel it's part of giving back to sort of destigmatize the discussion.
Well, I love that because when you destigmatize it, more people are willing to talk about it. And I don't know why for the longest time, and I'm hoping this is starting to change, but your brain is an organ just like a heart is in your body. But for some reason, when someone has something wrong with their brain, we treat them differently than if there was something wrong with their heart. And, we can treat both of them with medication, but yet for some reason, somewhere along the way, we had changed that. So that's part of the reason why I want you to come on the show. So maybe we could start that. And by the way, thanks for giving some permission to be a little lighthearted about it. Not that we don't take this seriously, because if we didn't, we wouldn't have you on the show.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I really appreciate that. And I think when that is such amazing insight right there let's bring a little levity to this so we can talk about it.
And obviously, serious mental illness impacts a certain percentage of the population. When you talk about the practice of law, our numbers are higher. There are a couple of ways of slicing it, but no matter how you get there, we either have the highest or second highest incidence of serious mental illness among professions. That's different than jobs. Coal miners have generally higher than anyone. And in terms of suicide, our rates are higher even more for female lawyers than male lawyers.
Interesting.
There's no data on, in the presentation I give to lawyers, I ask the room, I want you to agree with one or two of these statements. Statement one, do you have to be crazy to want to be a lawyer? And then statement two is, does making a lawyer drive you crazy? And the answer is a little both.
Yeah, and some bars, state bars, have programs to try and identify these types of issues and offer attorneys help.
Yeah.
So, this would be just a statement to any attorneys who might be listening that there are resources even through the state bar. And some state bars are better than others, okay? And you may know that far better than I do, but some are better than others at giving people the help that they need to try and deal with these issues. So it just goes back to what you were saying earlier, and that I think will be a recurring message. The help is out there. You just need to go out there and find it and get that help.
Mm-hmm. And I think I read an article that you wrote that said that the third highest cause of death of lawyers is suicide.
Yes.
That's incredible.
It is a shocking statistic when you look at the study, just to make it a little less extreme. They take any heart-related illness, and that's number one, heart illness. Cancer, as opposed to being broken down by different types, is number two. When you've taken so many subgroups out and put them in two big groups, suicide becomes in third. If you started breaking it out one by one, what might not be as high, it's still an astoundingly large number when compared to other professions or society as a whole.
I agree with you, because I would think car accidents or slip and fall, just, accidental injury, like those types of things, I would think would be more prevalent than suicide. So to hear that the statistics and the numbers are that it's third on that list, that really is scary.
So let's try to define, at least for the purpose of this show, mental illness. And I know that you've put some material together. How do we define it from a mental health standpoint? From a medical profession, how does the law define it? And I know you have some practical framework to put that in as well.
I'm not going to go about citing statutes or sections of manuals, but everyone who defines it starts with the person at issue is behaving differently.
Okay.
And then they go from why they are behaving differently to why are they behaving differently. And then they add on an element of, is that within societal norms? And so the Georgia definition is probably the narrowest. It doesn't necessarily talk about things that are out of the ordinary. If you're having a bad day, technically, if you looked at the Georgia statute, you might conclude that you have mental illness. The Diagnostical Statistical Manual definition quadruples the number of words in the Georgia definition, basically adds the same, comes to the same conclusion, but adds the concept of two other concepts. One, intentionally being a jerk doesn't make you mentally ill. And two, if you're having a normal reaction to stimulus, that doesn't make you mentally ill. And so when I talk about this, I talk about this two-part test of intentional behavior and normal reaction. And so if a man runs into a room screaming, in 3 different films, first person runs in screaming, second person runs in screaming, third person runs in screaming, and I can tell you that one of them is mentally ill and the other two aren't. You don't know yet just by looking at the person screaming. First guy, it turns out, just saw his family get run over by a car. Is he screaming? Yeah. Is that normal? Yeah, it's a normal reaction to what he's seeing, but it's involuntary. So it's involuntary, but it's normal. Second guy walks into the room, also screaming. Why is he screaming? Because he wants to convince you that his family just got run over by a car, so you'll give him money. Okay? He's a con man. Okay? Is his action intentional? Yes, but is it a reaction to a stimulus? No. The third guy is walking into the room screaming because it's Tuesday. That person has perhaps some mental health issues. And it's only when you get behind what's going on inside someone's head. There's no test. There's no blood test. There's no skin test. There's no multi-factor checklist. It's one of those you know it when you see it kind of things.
Yeah, and that's, I love the way you just put that. So that way if someone, and I know later I do want us to talk about, like, what's the best way for us to try to help someone, because I'm sure there's some ways that are good and some ways that are absolutely horrible to get people to convince them, or, try to help them, number one, and number two, convince them to maybe go see a professional. And we'll get into that later. But I know that it affects more than just, well, most judges are also lawyers, but there's been a couple suicides recently for judges.
Couple of judge suicides. I don't keep a mental record of dates and names other than collecting headlines for the purpose of a presentation. Every time I give the presentation, I'll do a news search in Georgia for judge or attorney in suicide, and I generally always have 5 or 6 headlines to put up on that particular slide going back a couple of years.
Wow!
So it's there.
Yeah, and then a lot of people think, well, if you're a judge or you're a lawyer, you've made it. Why would you want to commit suicide? Like a lot of people struggle with that, and comes back to what you were saying, that there's a pebble in their shoe, and they think that someone else has that pebble as well, or everybody else has the same pebble.
Well, and don't we deal with that, or isn't that how we see so many people, whether they are attorneys or doctors or kids or whatever, and to me, it's that something's going on, and it could just be the mental illness, or they just can't see that light at the end of the tunnel. Where what I've seen so often in our practice is sometimes it's hard for people, and they end up getting very depressed. They can't see that light at the end of the tunnel. We have that superpower only because we've been through 1,000 divorces, and we know there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You're on day one, and it may be a 400, 300, 200-day process. You can't see that light at the end of the tunnel. But going to what you were talking about, sometimes it's hard for people to see it, and it's hard for you to even communicate that to those people, which is, again, why they need to talk to somebody that can really help work them through it.
The other thing to consider, talk about a little bit more, so far we've been focusing on suicide, which is all well. But for every suicide, there are 24 unsuccessfuls. And for that group, there are another 250 people out there with serious mental health issues that haven't even tried. And so we can talk and mourn the loss of the one, but we've got to focus on the other 300 step by step.
That's a great point.
Good point. Glad you're here.
Thank you. I get free water.
No. Actually, you'll be billed for that at the end. Yeah.
I'll let you break it down.
I'm going to mess you up by actually saying something else, and then I'll get to that.
Okay.
You
don't mess him up. We'll never get back.
The first thing you need to do is not let people with bipolar issues change the subject on you. No. Sorry. No. You talked about struggled, past tense, and you said I have someone who has struggled with, and I want to make it clear that this isn't a cut on your arm that you get stitches of and move on from. I had to have some deeper work done after a suicide attempt. There's some inpatient, there's some really long outpatient stuff. But part of that is the doctors spend a good amount of time figuring out what chemicals to treat you with. Everyone's brain's wired just a little bit differently, and it takes a while. It took them about a year to get the mix right for me. And then that's not the end of your struggle either. If you think that you have cured yourself by taking a pill or a group of them, no, you've got to stay in therapy, and you've got to remain aware of what your danger points are and what to avoid. If you think you've solved it just by, 3 prescriptions, and you see a guy 15 minutes every 3 months to keep him legal, you're not done.
It's like addiction.
Yes,
it's a life. I've met people, we all have, who have dealt with addiction issues, and usually the people who really are on the right path, they'll look at you and they'll. I once met someone and it was like, "Hi, my name is Mac. I'm an addict." I mean, they embraced it, but it's a lifelong fight.
Right.
It's more to me like diabetes or asthma.
Yeah.
Where, it just, you've got to take the meds. You've got to know what the danger signs are. Addiction's just scarier.
Yeah.
I know too many people, for analysis purposes, they take lawyers with addiction problems and lawyers with mental health problems, and they have us go to group therapy together.
Yeah.
And the things I've seen on the addiction side are so dangerous and so insidious that it's not my thing, but it's just so much more.
And all I was, the only thing I was saying was basically it's a lifelong
struggle
battle.
Yeah.
And thanks for clarifying that. Because we have experience in our cases where somebody will realize that maybe they're suffering from some form of clinical depression or bipolar disorder. They get the mixture right. They start taking it. They feel good. I don't need to take this anymore.
Yeah.
I feel great. And then they come off of it, and then boom, there's this huge, they're back into where they were before.
Or the meds need to be changed.
Yeah.
I mean, they stop being as effective as they were when you first start using them. They could be great, but then 6 months later, a year later, if you've stopped going to the doctor, but you're still taking certain meds, they may not be working the way they need to work.
Yeah, they do work.
Yeah.
I will say, and it's not like taking a pill that changes the way you feel instantaneously. You're not taking an upper, you're not taking a downer. Mm-hmm. If I gave you a lithium to take, it would not change your life in any way, shape, or form today, except you'd have a sour taste in your mouth. After 2 or 3 weeks, if you take it regularly and build it up, certain chemical changes will happen inside of you, but it's not a pill that you take to feel good. And that's why it requires a commitment. But your question was, what would be helpful? What can you look for to be helpful to your friends and your loved ones? And, if you typed in list of factors to look for, you'd get this clinical list, which is correct, but in my view, not necessarily useful. Is the person in a depressed mood? Do people walk around saying, "Hi, I'm in a depressed mood"? Is the person having suicidal thoughts? Is the person taking personal injury? The lists are all true statements, but not very useful to the layperson. The Montana Bar came up with a really good list for lawyers. And when you look at them, you're like, yeah, does this lawyer has he or she stopped returning phone calls? Has there been a change in the quality of written product? Are there canceled meetings? Are there an increased amount of extensions being sought? All these factors that would run at the same time as a depression issue. And if you use those factors, you can notice these things. Judges who see lawyers repeatedly have the ability to do it one way. As we see our colleagues, we can do it another way. And just because the factors that we're talking about here today are practice of law factors, that doesn't mean with a little creativity you couldn't apply this list to accountants or doctors or school teachers or whatever. I'll show my age. How many times is that teacher showing film strips this week?
Mm-hmm. Well, you can do that with an employee, anybody, a coworker.
Yeah.
That they're not showing up to work. They start showing up late. They're I'll get this project to you tomorrow, and you get it 2 weeks later, and you have to bug them every day to get it. You can apply that to a spouse as well. Like, I'll pay the bill tomorrow, because I think this has come up in some of our cases. They'll be, I'll pay the bill tomorrow. They don't pay it. Next thing, the mortgage is going into foreclosure.
Well, I also like that it's hitting it from a different angle, because, there are attorneys that I work with, or I have cases against those attorneys, but I don't go to the barbecue with them, and I don't see them on a daily basis in a social setting. So some of the other lists that you were referring to, That's great, perhaps, for family members and people that are living in the same home or see them regularly. But this other list by the Montana Bar is great because it's allowing more people than just the inner circle to be on the lookout for warning signs.
Absolutely. One thing to consider in that regard also, and this is more particular toward attorneys or other high-achieving professions, we are very good at putting on a mask. We can put on a good show no matter how we're feeling inside because that's what we're trained to do. I'll personalize it. Todd, you met me within months of my suicide attempt, not knowing any of the background, in a situation where we're both volunteering to help overprivileged kids.
It was a very sad situation.
It's a sad situation at this private school in Buckhead where these kids couldn't get more than 7 lawyers to help them out for mock trial preparation.
Yeah, that's right. I cry myself to sleep every night.
But you met me in that situation, and I would think that unless you were told that there was something else going on, you wouldn't have known that I was just on the other side of what amounts to a nervous breakdown.
There was nothing, since you bring it up, your behavior and the way you interacted with me, with other adults, and with the kids, in my mind, there were no warning signs. There were no issues that I could see, because I couldn't see behind the curtains. Everything looked, for lack of a better way of putting it, normal.
Yeah. Did you ever find out who slashed the tires on your car?
I didn't. And
it was Peter.
Well, yeah. We'll deal with that after after we go to a break.
So, is there anything else that we can be doing to help identify these problems?
Just honestly, paying attention to change.
Okay.
If you pay attention to change, then you'll be able to see if there's an issue. The harder question is not, do you notice a change? Because you're going to notice changes. It's how do you say to someone, hey, I think you might have a problem. Step one, don't say, hey, I think you might have a problem. Because you're going to get pushback. The person's going to be saying, hey, everything in my life is wonderful. Everything's on track. Why do you think there's an issue? I don't want to listen to you anymore. If you're in a group, if you're in an office and there are 30 of you and you're all worried about Bob over here, maybe talk to a couple of other people about Bob. The concept of an intervention is not unuseful in a situation like this. Or if Bob, who I'm using as the example here, is an analytical sort, hey, Bob, we're all thinking about these 10 things. Are any of these things happening in your life right now? And get Bob to self-realize.
Ah, okay.
Well, and I agree with you, and it's a difficult conversation. But in the context of what this show is about and the consequences of not stepping forward and having the difficult conversation, it's a conversation that you have to have.
So
absolutely.
So you think that coming together in numbers is better than one-on-one?
I don't like to put a rule out there on something like this. I think it depends on who's talking, who's listening, who else is in the room. There are too many personal variables to speak. I think they're all tools, and it would depend on the person.
Can you give us some ideas, just give us some thoughts on how we could approach someone that we're concerned, like we've seen changes in them, they're not acting themselves, what we might consider themselves, or, they came screaming in the room and it was just Tuesday.
Yeah. A lot of it is going to depend on who you are to them.
Okay.
That guy that you've been friends with since 9th grade, who you know like a brother, the way you're going to approach him is by definition going to be different than the employee you've had for 3 years who you see maybe 5 to 10 hours a week.
Okay.
Your ability to approach your buddy is very direct, sit down, man, I love you and I care about you, and A, B, C, and D. Your employee, I'm not an employment lawyer, but I would guess that you want 2 people in the room when talking with an employee about that personal issue. You're going to be a little bit more hands off. Hey, here are some objective things that we've noticed. We'd like you to consider, getting some care. Here are some places to call. Or if you have a third-party friend, if you're concerned about, your employee and you know that someone else who's friendly with them is also concerned, get with that person. You know,
So
what doesn't work? Walking into someone's office saying, "I think you're crazy. Go see a shrink." And and then there's
Lee. So stop doing that to me.
there are a couple of other ways of going about doing it, and now I'm talking about lawyers in particular.
Okay.
So the Georgia Bar has the lawyer assistance program. All the information's on the bar website. You, for example, can call the lawyer assistance program and say anonymously, "I'm concerned about Bob. Can you give Bob a call and say, hey, do you have anything going on? Because a couple of people have called us and said you might have something going on." And that's the kind of, Bob might not want to tell you, but Bob will tell, the empty chair over there without worrying about the stigma. LAP is confidential. It is right now, as a matter of fact, and very soon as a matter of law, completely disconnected from discipline. In other words, you can walk in and say, "I'm doing bad things," and they are not allowed to tell the folks over in discipline. And it's something the bar has that's out there. You get, and I'm oversimplifying, 6 free counseling sessions a year within certain parameters and rules and so on and so forth. And they're there for you.
Wow.
They're underutilized. Standard utilization rates of a professional assistance program sit at around 7% of the pool will utilize the program. In Georgia, 1% is utilizing the program.
Wow. 1%.
Now, there's always another side to that number. Utilizing a free assistance program usually goes hand in hand with someone who needs a free assistance program. Many lawyers do have relationships with therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, clergy, and those aren't counted toward that number, obviously.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about, what do you look for in yourself? Because I imagine awareness is an important tool. We talked in the last segment how you're constantly, what to look for, because if this is an ongoing struggle, it's not something you just had surgery for a few years ago and you're A-okay. It's something you're constantly working through. What is it? Are there some tools or some tips, or what do we need to be looking for in ourselves?
So let's go pre and post. I'll use the word knowledge or incident. Post incident, where something bad has happened and you're getting care, you're going to have a professional working with you on particular specific things that you need to look for in yourself. And that's going to be different from person to person to person.
Okay.
But if you're worrying, what should I look at? Things that I look back and say, wow, if only I'd have noticed that. Are you getting passed over for certain things that you should have been chosen for? Are you being excluded from certain groups? Do you find that your social calendar is less filled? Things like that matter. Are your client numbers going down? Or on the other end, do you find that you're working till midnight every day to get things done because you have to? Anything that shows a change one way or the other. One might not matter. Everyone has a busy week. But if you have 6 busy weeks in a row and you're not picked for Little League coach and you can't get that board seat, that would cause you to ask yourself, what is it about me that is causing people around me to treat me differently?
But it's so difficult. It's the analogy I use is that, and I hate the analogy, but that frog that you put into cold water, but then you heat it up and it doesn't even realize that the water is heating up. Sometimes it's cumulative. Sometimes it happens over a long period of time. In other words, you might see that you are losing some customers, but maybe you think it's cyclical, or you're working too hard, or you're getting passed over, or people aren't socializing with you. And it's a very gradual kind of thing. It's not like all of a sudden one day you are acting so dramatically different that people start to treat you differently. And so I have to assume sometimes it's difficult to even know that there's a problem, let alone get to a point where you are ignoring the problem and pretending like there's not one.
I think that's absolutely true. And it self-awareness, although the ultimate cure, is so hard to get at, and it's oftentimes too late. And then you mix it in with, hey, part of what is mental health versus mental illness is there are things that are normal. This weekend, for example, on Saturday After sleeping late, I took a 3-hour nap in the afternoon. Okay, wow. Does that mean I'm depressed? Actually, as it turned out, it meant I was tired. I went to bed at 8 o'clock and woke up there. You know, sometimes things that equal a mental health signal are just normal. I'm sad. Why? My puppy died. You know, you've got to break out what's normal from what's not, and then come to some sort of understanding with yourself as to when you're going to be concerned. That's why I like asthma I don't like asthma, but that's why I like asthma as a metaphor here. My lungs are feeling tight. There's a field of hay. Should I play football in the field of hay? You know, sorts of things that you can stay aware of.
I think what you just said was you asked questions. I'm tired. Why am I tired?
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I stayed up late last night. We were watching, we went to the movies and had fun with friends, and I tossed and turned all night. So it's okay to take a nap.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it's asking those questions. And I've been turned to, you know, I didn't get picked to be the Little League softball coach. The group I was hanging out with, they had a couple meetings that didn't even tell me about them. There must be something going on that I'm missing. So I would guess that, you know, a helpful thing would be to possibly talk to them directly. Hey, have I done anything to offend you? Or possibly go into counseling. You may not know what's wrong. You just know that something's going on. Because I think a lot of people I've talked to that you would meet that they actually don't have a mental illness, but they get through these situational depression. A couple bad things happen. They can't get out of it. And I've talked to them. They've said counseling is a wonderful thing. It helps them walk through it.
Absolutely. If you're talking to the right person, you know, that doesn't mean you've got a mental illness issue. Sometimes life is hard, and that doesn't, just because you're having a hard time when life is hard doesn't mean you have a mental illness issue.
Yeah. Well, I can't believe we've almost out of show again.
I blame you.
I talk too much.
I'll tell you a quick story.
Okay,
So
great.
there's a guy driving down the road.
All right.
Tire goes flat. Takes the tire off. The nuts fall off into a ditch on the side of the road. He starts screaming. Guy in the building says, "Hey, what are you screaming at?" Our guy on the road looks to the building and sees that it's a mental hospital, so he ignores the guy screaming. Screaming. "Hey, you down there with the car, you down there with the car." Finally, he realizes he's not going to go anywhere anyway, so he says to the guy in the building, "What?" The guy in the building says, "Here's what you do. You take one nut off each of the other 3 tires, and you put your 4th tire back on. You go up and buy some new nuts." Our guy nods and says, "Wow. Hey, if you're able to figure that out, and I'm not, how come you're in there and I'm out here?" Our guy on the inside says, "Well, I'm here because I'm crazy, not because I'm stupid." There's a difference between intellect and sanity. And you can't let your feeling that you're so smart and you can fix everything delude you into believing you're focused on your mental health as well.
Wow. Eric, we're almost out of time. Real quick, how can people find you again?
www.langlegal.com is probably the quickest way.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and especially that last story. I love it. And everyone, you know, if you're listening to this and you want to listen to it again, you can find us in most podcast directories. Just check us out. And if you're struggling with something, get some help. Don't be afraid. Thanks so much for listening.
This audio program does not establish an attorney-client relationship with Meriwether and Tharp.